Hi, I've got a question.
What's your first name, sir?
I'm Michael. I am
Mike.
Imperial alumni, and I run a shipping company. I've got actually two questions, but first one is to Professor Dembski. Obrigado, for your very good presentation. The reason why you not included Brasilia, the Brazilian capital, is because it's on the other side of the extreme that you presented about Brazilian cities, or for any other reason.
Interesting. Do we collect questions, or how would
Just
you
answer. Yeah, don't make it too complex. It's late in the day. Keep it straightforward.
I think, Brasilia would be a different case, wouldn't it? Designed in a very particular era and moment for the automobile, you're right, it would have been a nice way to bring in that idea of the central space theory, something like Corbusier meets the automobile in 1960 with JK and the future opening up for Brazil. But then rigidified form with the informal city all around, and a real problem of the lack of a dynamic center, which Rio definitely has, and Sao Paulo as well. So that in some sense it's a city without a heart by design, and it shows you maybe the danger of moving too much from urban theory and the page right into reality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Yes, sir.
Ben Rendell, Engineering Physical Sciences Research Council. Can I ask David to expand a bit more what he meant by digital economy emissions?
Sorry,
When you talk about emissions, carbon emissions, and then you refer to digital economy emissions.
yeah, I mean, there are estimates about the volume of total CO2 emissions on a global scale, which are growing very rapidly. The last time I looked at them, they're about 1% of global carbon emissions annually, and they're rapidly catching up. Aviation emissions are about 2%, and they're, deploying a large-scale digital economy will take carbon, and we've got a budget of 2,100 or 2,200 billion tons of CO2. Okay, if we reach that point, according to climate scientists, you're adding 1 degree plus. Okay, so for every trillion tons of carbon, you add 1 degree plus. But in terms of carbon dioxide, it's 3 point something. You multiply by the emissions to convert into CO2. So the question is that there are external pressures on the digital economy. The digital economy can be a fuel for further carbon-intensive lifestyles, and that could be an issue when we think about the future.
So is that the white van local delivery piece, or is that the
That's
the power consumption of the
that's the power consumption of
the
the computers, yes, because they require large data centers. If you go to Silicon Valley in California, they need a lot of aircon, okay, and it has to run 24 hours, 367 days. It has to run the whole year, okay, and that's why you need a lot of electricity to develop your digital economy, and that's just the first order effect. You also have a related environment that, like van traffic and the rest of the story, the e-commerce, e-shipments, which are massive already. If you look at American stats on e-shipments, which is basically shipments online from industrial plant to industrial plant, it's a massive market. It's, I can send you the figures, but I think they're above $1 trillion. And all this has a carbon dimension. So the digital economy is not for free.
Yeah, hi, Joe Rivers here. And to follow up on Anne's great presentation and Gary's scorching analysis, and also a question to Alan. Could the deliberative technology scenario making collaborative process that you beautifully describe be part of the answer to the questions raised by Gary about the contradictions of the neoliberal trend in urban planning and urban economics and so on. That's the short question. Also, then we have great examples of all these apps from different places and so on. And somewhere in my slides, which I didn't show, there's a photograph of people waiting in a bus queue, and every single person is on their app, you know, face buried in their mobile. And you think, well, when I was a kid, people used to talk to each other in bus queues, but now everybody's on their smartphones. Is this progress? So, that's the short question. Is that part of the problem or part of the solution?
The first scenario.
Does it solve the world's problems? I think it changes the world, and then you invite a new set of problems. So, but I suppose I'm very interested in the notion of how much agency people have in their own lives, and I'm also very interested in how certain mechanisms become hardwired when you create infrastructure. So I think there's some questions we can be asking that might be solved on a micro scale, but actually relate to a much more macro level of innovation. And we make people through those infrastructures, we make our society through those infrastructures. So yes, I think the idea that people are engaged in making their futures is really important, but I don't think it solves everything. Does that answer your question?
Enough, yeah, for the moment. But it fits into the other.
Maybe I can add to it, because although I've been talking about apps, actually my specialism is actually public transport. And yesterday I was actually running a focus group for the South Hampshire area, talking particularly to people in terms of improving accessibility, because buses don't run frequently, pretty much outside London and most cities. And the issue really was the local authorities trying to implement new measures that help this process. And some of the suggestions that were taken were things like improving real-time information systems, improving mobile information and what have you. And one of the comments that's thrown in there was, that's all well and good, but what I care about is how frequent the bus service is and whether I get a seat. So the reason why I'm saying this is because I think it's important when we look at technologies, we're applying it in the context of, what are we trying to do here? You can't have technology without the fundamental service being good enough. I think it's only when you've got the fundamental service good enough, then you can build on that and use technology as an enabler, somebody said earlier, and to use it as a communicator. I appreciate the irony of what you said, which is that sometimes it can be a disenabler, but I don't think that's necessarily down to the technology. I think it's, in part, is smartphones is not just either something to use apps or to get information or to use as phoning, but it's also a fashion accessory and all sorts of other things, which I think makes it a very complex environment. And I'm not a social scientist in any way, shape, or form, but I think changing behaviour isn't just about how they use the technology. It's also about how do you get people changing more generally, because I think things have changed, and smartphone is part of that. That's.
I think you got a good answer there, Joe.
And Gary, any recommendations for the problems of neoliberal?
That this. I would just say the following thing, maybe that this space for human communication that we saw featured in your work is so fundamental as a response to the city. And in particular, I think the young people, which we saw were such a high proportion of users, are familiar with, they're comfortable with that kind of technology. And I think they can incorporate that. But for people who might feel dislocated, this is fundamental to have this space for communication. One thing that I think that this problem of the mismatch in design is in spaces that have vast amounts of inequality is the fact that those who are afflicted by that and can't afford to live in the urban core are going to be taken from their communities for so many hours a day, and leaving the inability there to create the kind of urban culture and connection that's very refreshing. Part of the tragedy of California's housing crisis now is that much of the housing that collapsed in the subprime was occupied by people who were like grandchildren of farm workers who were getting their first homeownership experience in the Great Valley, commuting into the coast, often 3 hours at a crack and 6 hours a day even. And those are now the homes where they lost their wealth. But because they never could really inhabit those homes, industrial opportunities, wage opportunities, and kind of social communities there never really flourished. I mean, what we want is the kind of world you're talking about, and I can't resist mentioning a conflict in Rio de Janeiro, in Copacabana, Santa Teresa, where there's a neighbor that had a cock, and the cock was crowing before dawn and waking up neighbors. And some members of the apartment building where this was occurring made a petition to file a complaint to get a penalty to make a crime. Other neighbors ended up filing a counter petition against that, and what ended up happening was that they ended up starting a school of samba that centered around this samba that somebody wrote about the cock on Santa Teresa. Now that's what you want, right? As an urban community with some resilience, and where you have the culture able to express itself and people comfortable in their own skins and in their own spaces.
We need more of that Brazilian culture, I tell you. Definitely do. Right, one more question then, I think, and then we're gone. Have you had the last one? You were gone. Later.
Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Louisa from Startup Bootcamp, a startup accelerator in Berlin. And my question is to Anne. I really like your approach to problem solving and finding a solution by going to basically the customer and asking him or her what are their needs, and then letting them come up with a solution. So I was wondering, what is your opinion to the theory of sometimes innovation cannot be driven by the customer because the customer doesn't actually know what he wants? Sort of like Pinterest, you know, it's like an irrelevant application almost, and customers were, or even investors were like, no one needs this, but it's taken off hugely, and now some people don't go without it.
Yes, I love Pinterest, and I don't know what I use it for. But I think I absolutely agree that if you want radical change, it doesn't necessarily come from a group of ordinary users, but it can come through a group of extreme users. So we've seen some really interesting developments happen where people who really care about something get stuck into it. And I think what I'm also seeing, working quite a lot with social activists in the context of making change, using technology as they see fit, is the degree which the care actually drives a lot of change. And so I'm stressing that because I think I'm detecting this sort of undercurrent of if you care, you will do more. And that's what a lot of companies are interested in motivating in their customers. But I also think that there was another issue being addressed in what we were doing with democratizing technology, which was quite specifically political, which was not necessarily about serving the customer corporate relationship. It was about asking people who don't think about these things very much to engage in a different kind of discourse with a very deliberate idea of finding their way into something that was perhaps bewildering or irrelevant to them. And I don't know that that necessarily speaks about customer. I deliberately called it engaging citizens because I think that it's partly that rhetoric. And I don't think that they're mutually exclusive, but I think it's important to recognise that other aspect.
Thank you. So can we thank our panel? Thank you very much.
No, I'm just going to say that this is reintroduced John Nelson back in the beginning, and then Gary's some closing remarks about how they felt the day went.
Okay.
So there's only Gary and myself standing between everyone and the exit.
I know.
So we have to be quick. So just a very few remarks from me first of all. Obviously, we hope that you've enjoyed the day. One of our intentions was to give you all something of the flavour of digital economy type research, and so we've deliberately brought together a set of speakers from some quite different and diverse backgrounds. We hope you have been introduced to new ideas that will challenge you, ideas that will perhaps give you a new perspective on your own research, and certainly within digital economy type research, we're constantly brushing up against new ideas, not only from fellow researchers, but very importantly from our stakeholders, from our end users. We positioned the workshop or symposium at the interface between technology and society, and that's been illustrated with a variety of problems or opportunities in transport and also in smart cities. And of course, I firmly believe we can't have a smart city without understanding the mobility requirements of the citizens. We've heard a lot about data and the role of data, and to expand on that, I guess the role of data in the digital economy. I learned a new word from TfL, explaining to us how some of their data is pseudo-anonymous. I like that. And I also, I know it's slightly invidious to point or to highlight any particular individual at this time of the day, but because it came up in the Q&A at the end, it stayed in my mind. David, raising your observations about the digital economy and the consumption of the carbon budget. I think that's really really important point. I certainly like to spend a bit more time thinking about that. I suppose finally, I think yes, we have had some glimpses of the future and some looking at the past in order to learn about the future. Personally, I hope that there will be a stronger move towards sharing of the transport resource, and it's quite interesting that that there was that recurring point about the fact that a lot of people own cars and don't use them, or rather there is a resource there that could be used in a shared way. So I've enjoyed today, as I hope everyone else has. We had a great set of speakers and a very good interaction through the Q&As as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like an Oscar speech. That was on and on and on. On and on. Give me 5 minutes.
Well into 5 minutes.
Right, because the Oscars, be careful when you go to the Oscars. I tell you, 45 seconds. And, I want to thank everybody very much for coming. I really enjoyed your company. I haven't spoke to everybody. I'm sorry about that. But I really appreciate everybody coming and participating. I hope you've got something from it. I just hope it's not, you've actually got something good, and can keep the dialogue going. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done, I think, in this space, this future city space, transport space. I think we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of opportunities as well as problems and and negatives. There's a lot of positives as well, I think. So I think we need to keep talking about it. I think we need to be doing events like this. I think we need to be keeping the dialogue going, keeping the conversation going, getting publications, disseminations, convincing people what we're doing is the right things to be doing, and that we can have a big impact on society. I don't agree with John Paul. I think as academics, we've had the privilege and the luxury of doing what we wanted for years, but things are changing now. I think it's not going to continue much longer. We've got to start doing things for people, ordinary people, as well as all kinds of different people. But I think the environment's changing, and the pressure on us now is going to increase. We've got to ride that wave of stress and pressure to do things. On positive things, I think we've got this supply chain management journal. So if anybody wants to produce a paper, submit that. We've got various networks, the Sustainable Society Network. We've got our own network, Future Cities and Community Resilience Network on the Blue Flyer. So by all means, if you want to join in things, you're welcome. We're going to be organising an event in May in Manchester in a cafe. If anybody follows music, we're going to be organising an event by a founder of Joy Division, called Warren Bramley. We're going to be doing that in Manchester in a cafe onto the street and getting local people involved with us on the high street. So if you're interested in them kind of things, just keep in the conversation. David Vanilla from Oxford, we were talking with Dave last night at the bar after about 5 pints. Everybody had gone home, there were no one left but me and Dave at this bar, kind of like a lonely sight of two academics. Everybody disappeared, and we were talking, David, maybe put together some kind of book, weren't we? That's what we're thinking about. So an edited book, and we'll let everybody know when that comes to fruition, and your pieces can go in that. People who haven't presented or in the audience, if you're interested in producing something, send us something, and we'll keep in the dialogue with everybody, so we'll let you know when that comes about. Okay, so just to finish, I want to thank everybody for coming. I hope you keep in touch with me and John, Steve, and the rest of the team. It's been great seeing you. Thank you very much. Thank you.